When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadavji, your podcast host, a practicing clinical social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 11. She acknowledged her turmoil, took her stance, and then she rose. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our guest, Clarity Barton. She is a high priestess, teacher of divine feminine spirituality, and a women's empowerment leader. She is the founder of The Awakened Priestess, an online school for modern priestesses. She has been organizing women's circles, workshops, and retreats for the past 6 years in Toronto, Central America, Asia, and Europe. Clarity is passionate about creating compassionate, sacred spaces where her sisters can feel heard, seen, and celebrated for their inherent beauty and wisdom. Clarity has studied spiritual psychotherapy and spiritual direction at the Transformational Arts College in Toronto, Canada. With her background in business and marketing, Clarity offers one-on-one business coaching sessions to help her sisters find financial independence and to gain a sense of purpose doing what they love. Clarity also offers individual priestess mentoring and programs where she guides and holds space for her sisters with a humble heart and loving intentions. Although she maintains her close ties with Toronto, she has now relocated to Costa Rica and continues to thrive with an international community of women healers. Hi, Clarity. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hi, Salima. Thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh my goodness, the pleasure is all mine. I am so delighted to have you on the show and that you're coming onto the show, bringing with you the willingness to share and your support for taking a stance to help break barriers of mental stigma.
Thank you for having me.
And so, Clarity, this podcast is about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether it is directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter the story, there is impact on one's own mental health, in some way at least, which remains tucked away. So this platform, it serves as a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So that's why you and I are here. We are here really encouraging people to share and tell what individuals typically have reluctance for exposing.
Beautiful.
Yes, thank you. So tell me, how ready are you for this conversation?
Super ready, super excited, super happy to be here.
This is super awesome. Wonderful. Okay, Clarity. For the first question, Give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
It would read something like, Woman rises after going into the depth of her shadow.
A woman rises after going into the depth of her shadow. That is very intriguing. What does this headline mean to you?
Well, for me, the shadow is the trauma and those dark places that we can find ourselves. And for me, that was my childhood was very traumatic. And I now feel that I'm able to really thrive from having gone through this. So that's what it means for me.
Wow. Now you're able to thrive after having gone through that. This has got me even more curious about the tellings of your untold story. So please go ahead and share, what is your untold story all about?
Well, I was raised in Switzerland. I grew up in a family of 5 with 3 children, being the youngest. And my father, who I love deeply and I don't hold grudges towards, is, however, he's 20 years older than my mother, and he is Italian. And so he rose us with very conservative, old school, patriarchal ways. And he would sometimes, in a very obvious way, say, you know, I'm the father of the family. I get to decide. I get to create the rules. And he was also abusive towards us physically and emotionally in many ways. And on top of that, my brother, who was a victim of this kind of environment himself, was taking it out onto me as the youngest and was bullying me every single day in a very intense way. My sister was bullying me in more of an emotional sense as well. And my mother, unfortunately, was not able to show up for me. So I was left with a lot of feelings of hopelessness and fear. I feel like I really grew up in fear, and I had to protect myself emotionally. It was so much for me that I couldn't feel all of this at the time. And it created this big trauma that I'm still carrying today.
Wow. I can't imagine what that was like for you to grow up in a place where there was all these different aspects of abuse that you endured.
Yeah, it was a lot, and I didn't really feel it myself. I didn't have that compassion for myself. I didn't never saw myself as a victim until more recently. So I feel like I'm only processing it now as a 33-year-old woman, adult woman, because it was so much, and I did a really good job at numbing myself to protect myself, protect my heart, and build this armor around it.
Building an armor of protection through numbness. And I'm curious, you mentioned that you endured physical abuse from your father, and then that trickled down in how your brother was expressing his frustration and taking it out on you, and similarly your sister. What was it like for you to feel like your mom couldn't show up for you?
Well, she was like my superhero in a way. I grew up to idealize my mother because she was the only one who wasn't abusing me. And I felt that she was like an angel as a result. And I actually didn't realize that she had her own flaws, the fact that she couldn't show up for me is something that is what she had to deal with herself. And instead I was just absolutely desperate for her love and her attention, because that's what it felt actually for me, is this desperation for her to show up, constantly waiting, and yet she's never fully showing up because she's overwhelmed by everything. And she was also the one working for the family, because my father was very rarely working and making money himself.
Your mom was working, she was trying to manage all things. She clearly had many things on the go for herself in terms of managing the family, and even if she wanted to show up for you, it seemed like she wasn't even there because she was working or trying to feed the family.
Exactly.
Right. Do you feel like your story has a lot to do with the idea of how your past became internalized?
Absolutely. Yes, I think it's everyone's case. We internalize the voices of our parents, they become our own voices. We played these roles out ourselves later on in our lives. Fortunately, I've done a lot of work on myself to stop those patterns, but absolutely, I still feel very much the victim and the abuser both within myself. And and just these emotions that are coming up in a way that's also this internalization of these external events that happened.
Clarity, you said something that caught my attention a few minutes ago. You mentioned that for some time you didn't have compassion for yourself, and you also didn't see yourself as a victim. And later on, you started to recognize that I have been a victim of trauma. There's traumatic events that I have endured and people that contributed to the trauma that I experienced. I'm bringing this up because oftentimes we hear people say, oh, this person is speaking from the place of victim. But I think there's different ways. I think there's something called victim mentality, which I think is what people refer to. And then there's victim, meaning honoring what I've actually endured.
Yeah, for sure. And that took me a long time. And it's an interesting process because intellectually I knew my whole life that I had a really hard childhood, and with my siblings we would talk about it. But it's only within the last couple of years, if not just last year, that I was able to feel sorry for myself, that I was able to look at my inner child and feel compassion for her and hold her and cry for her. And that's more what I meant, that I never really allow myself to feel the victim in a good sense, because I was defenseless, as a child, as we all are.
Yes, you're honoring yourself. So that's why I was bringing it up, because when I heard you say, I didn't see myself as a victim until much later, I saw it as this is me speaking my truth, being clear that this is something that happened to me. This is something that I experienced that, I didn't have a voice then, but now I could figure out that this is claiming a part of a process rather than, as you said, numbing or dismissing it, right?
Absolutely.
So tell me more about how you were affected, having gone through this journey of trauma and abuse and patriarchy.
Well, another thing about my father is that he has an addiction to pornography, and so has my brother. And I was exposed to pornography at a young age, and I grew up also in this. For me, it's also kind of a patriarchal symptom. And as a result, I internalized this objectified image of a woman and objectified myself in relation to men. And so I developed this pattern of feeling like I existed for men. And a lot of my behaviors were unconsciously to please men. And that affected me the most because I felt like my body was not my own. My beauty was not my own. I wouldn't dress for myself. I wouldn't make the decisions for myself even. So I grew up as a product of this patriarchal environment.
That's a really interesting way to put it together. But I'm also hearing that this is not like an isolated context of, feeling disempowered. There's so many patterns that have sort of emerged from this experience for you.
Yes, for sure. The patterns of not trusting men, fearing men in some way, or belittling men because I felt belittled by them. Just this imbalance in my relation to men and my relation to my own masculine, as I realized later on. And that's kind of the internalized part of it too. And that meant that I couldn't show up for myself. I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't have boundaries and say no, because my masculine itself was so weak and I was so used to being abused. And I didn't know that I could have boundaries or that I had the right to have my own voice and make my own decisions according to what felt good on a deep level for me. I didn't even know what that meant.
Right. Yeah. This is I'm just processing everything you just shared. Talking about the balance and of the boundaries and being able to say no, it's such a vital part of life, and being able to claim and own that, yeah, I have rights and I have my own voice and I can make my own decisions. I have choices, right? To have that moment it's like a light bulb moment from how you've been describing it so far. Like you were living this way just in the dark, not knowing. But when you
Yes,
recognized that, this is my right. This is my voice. I can choose
exactly.
this. I can
Yeah,
choose not
and
this.
I
Right?
was not modeled that there was options for me because my mother was in that similar pattern of living for her family and for her husband and not for herself. And so that's what I learned. In a way, I was never taught that I had choices. I never saw people, women especially around me, saying no.
So when you look back now and feeling all the emotions that you couldn't feel during that time, do you feel that things were also blurry for you?
Yes, of course, because we love our parents, and to think that our parents are our abusers is not something that we can accept for a long time. And that's the blurry part, is that, and still now in my abusive relationship, and I think that's very common for people, is there's a part of you that still wants to be with your abuser. And so drawing the boundary doesn't feel good on some level. And so you really have to retrain yourself to see things differently, to clarify and undo those blurry boundaries between you and others.
And so then how did you retrain your brain?
Well, that's a good question. How did I
Yeah.
do my best? Well, I think it was a long process for
Of
sure.
course.
One way, that I'll always remember was a huge breakthrough in my life. I went to see a play. I was living in Toronto, which was about 5, 6 years ago. And I went to see a play with an art is so powerful. It can be such a powerful medicine. And in that play was two women. The first part was the story of this woman who was clearly objectifying herself and living for the men in the play. There were two men. And the second part of the play was the story of a woman who was not in touch with her sexuality or her body, quite the opposite, seemingly, from the first one. And yet both of them felt completely empty and disempowered. I went home that day and I bawled my eyes out for hours.
Wow.
It was like a huge breakthrough for my consciousness.
Yeah.
And after that moment, I was able to see the patterns that I was in relation to the masculine and how I had been existing for men. And I did it to myself in a way. Of course, it came from that initial conditioning,
Well,
but I was
unconsciously.
so deep. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was so deep in this pattern. It really was my whole life.
What a cathartic release. I mean, of course, nobody wants to be on their own crying and bawling their eyes out. However, it's definitely a turbulent combined emotions that you are keeping within you. And so I find that when we're not paying attention to any particular process of our own and we're really fully engaged in something that we're witnessing, I find for myself that we can gravitate towards a lesson and we get messages and symbols of what's related to our stories, our own stories, my own story.
Absolutely, yeah. And since I had many breakthroughs, similarly, I've also done some shamanic ceremonies with plant medicine that, of course, accelerate this sort of awakening and growing consciousness around unconscious patterns such as these.
That's so fascinating. And, your story has so many parts to it, so many levels of trauma, different people involved from an earlier time in your life, and the patterning sort of emerging through your adult years until you made that recognition and had your light bulb moment. How would you say that your untold story has affected your mental health?
It's interesting because I think my mental health is more affected now than back then. As a child, I think because I had these really good protection mechanisms,
The safety
I
behaviors.
felt,
Yeah.
yeah, and I felt happier because there's this innocence in our childhood as well, and there's all the passion of teenage years, and being unconscious in a way is easier. And I also studied psychotherapy, so really going into myself through spirituality, meditation, psychotherapy, shadow work, plant medicine ceremony, all of that actually brought up these feelings. And now I feel like I'm having a harder time coping with these and having more issues with mental health in a way.
Well, yeah. I guess the conscious awareness, right? So you have more awareness. So it's in the forefront of your mind right now. And it as you said, it was more of an unconscious process at the time. So if you were numbing and trying to, live life the way you knew how, you might not have realized at the time how you were affected. But what about now, looking back at that time? Do you feel like there was another process in addition to the numbing?
Absolutely. And especially in my teenage years, I just grew up to have certain behaviors that were products of this trauma that I felt. And these were more, I was very fiery, I was angry, I was not kind to people, I was very manipulative, very judgmental. My heart was closed. That's how I felt. And I still experience this wounding in my heart that's really hard for me to open my heart and to as a result to feel connected to others. So the result of the trauma was more in terms of behaviors that I grew up to be an abuser myself, actually.
In what sense?
Well, all the ways that I described with this anger, the way I would speak to some people, be very fiery, argue a lot.
So lots of verbal abuse outwardly.
Yeah, even in the manipulation, perhaps with my partners, not so much. Actually, I'm very fortunate to have had really healthy, beautiful relationship with partners. I've found beautiful partners, so at least that wasn't the result of my abuse.
Okay. Wow. We've talked so much about your journey of everything in terms of the process. And as this process came to fruition, at what point did you notice that the resiliency was kicking in?
Well, more so nowadays, because I wake up every day with the struggle to go back into this feeling of low self-esteem, of self-sabotage, of feeling like I'm not doing enough, or I'm not authentic, and just this really harsh judgment on myself, which is this internalization of my abusers from my childhood. And I'm choosing willingly to sit on my yoga mat and meditate and pray and do postures and do breath work, and every day showing up for myself is really something that I've been doing more so in the past 5 years. This process has accelerated throughout those years as well. I'm really feeling like I'm showing up for myself in a conscious way even more now, and definitely choosing to overcome the pain that I've carried for so long.
I really like how you talked about showing up for yourself in a conscious way. It's very deliberate and clear. Like the actions that you're taking are very deliberate, and it's very clear where you're at in that moment when you're describing. Like, you will sit on the yoga mat and you will acknowledge where I'm at, what I'm feeling, what's going on. And I guess with all of the tools that you've learned, that must have helped to jumpstart the process and be a springboard for you.
Yes, absolutely. And also recognizing when I'm not showing up for myself. And I'm definitely still learning to love myself. Basically, this is the journey I'm on. Treat myself kindly with my thoughts, my words, my behaviors. Even if it's just watching a movie or eating something that is not necessarily the healthiest, these are actually really good for me, because I have a tendency to just be really hard on myself.
Yeah, it is very important to be able to acknowledge yourself without judgment. That it's okay to self-care can also be to give yourself a treat. I mean, indulging all the time it's that's a whole other story. But the idea of giving yourself permission to bring joy into your life, into your world, in that moment, that I'm going to eat that ice cream or that chocolate cake or whatever, but you do it like it's mindful and it's joyful and it's blissful and you're happily enjoying the taste pleasurably, enjoying
Absolutely.
it. And if you feel like you've been limited or unable to do that in the past without having judgment passed on you or comments made or what you may have told yourself or learned or been conditioned to tell yourself, it's important to be able to know that you can give yourself permission to indulge. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that permission to indulge is okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really feel I've done this in my psychotherapy training. I was learning about child work. Child work? Inner child work.
Yeah.
Right.
Inner child work is so important.
It's so good. So when I'm doing these things, and that was only in the past couple of years, and it really changed my life because my inner child was so wounded. And when I experienced those meditation the first time, I couldn't even speak afterwards. And I learned to bring her in my day more often. And so when I'm having these little treats for myself, I bring her in and I consciously feed her in those soulful, nourishing ways.
Yes, yes, that's such a great way. Like I mean, I'm very fond of inner child work as well, but I don't know that I've taken it as far with when I'm training myself to really pay attention to my little one. So
Mm-hmm.
I like that you do that. Or maybe I do it and I don't do it with so much like awareness. So I'm going to actually, that's a good tip. I'm going to actually pay attention to how I treat my little one and what I'm paying attention to the next time I'm doing a self-care or a treat, and really bringing that to consciousness. That's a really good way. That's a good approach. I really like that. So tell
Mm-hmm.
me more about your inner child work. It seems like the inner child work is really a driving force in part of your healing from your childhood trauma to get you to where you are now. Anything else that you can say about your inner child work?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by how the soul chooses to be born in a family that has a certain energetic imprint.
Mm-hmm.
And that I almost visualize by taking our first breath, we're bringing this imprint within ourselves. So we're meant to grow up with certain wounds because a child is so sensitive that, of course, they will absorb all of the emotions and the feelings, even if they're completely hidden
Mm-hmm.
from their siblings, from their parents, their
Mm-hmm.
family. And I chose to be born in this family. And I find that these people and their wounds are mine. There's almost
Mm-hmm.
like I take responsibility for it, and I take responsibility to heal those aspects in me because I now come to see that they're part of me as well.
Mm-hmm. That is such a key message.
And I love this idea of the soul contracts between all of us because I think if we chose to be born in a family with those specific souls, it's because we love each other
Mm-hmm.
at the end. We
Mm-hmm.
really do. And I do a lot of work in my spiritual practice and praying for my family and sending them love, sending them healing energy. And that has been really powerful. Actually, I see a lot of improvement in my whole family dynamics, my relationship
Mm-hmm.
to everyone, and their relationship between themselves as a
Mm-hmm.
result.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, it's such a neat concept, the soul contracts. And, you talk about ownership of their wounds are not my wounds, and my wounds I take responsibility for. That's incredible.
Yeah, no, I actually feel that, or the wounds that we internalize from our parents, if they're also ours, that's how I see it actually. Just like our ancestral wounds and our
Mm-hmm.
ancestral lineage are also ours, are also part of us. I think it can be helpful to see it separate from us if we
Mm-hmm.
have, if we want to have this consciousness, because that's true also on a level. But I also see these wounds, these archetypes. I work with archetypes a lot, like personas. These are part of my own psyche. And so I can talk to them. I can ask them questions. What do they actually want? Instead of them just unconsciously acting out or me trying to resist what they have to offer for me.
Right. There's always more of the lesson and the learning for our journey, for our story.
Absolutely. So I've done a lot of work in that regard with my inner masculine because that's the part of from my childhood that I felt was very wounded.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Clarity, you may be familiar that when I started this podcast, I talk about this idea of this journey and how I came to the conclusion of how some people are getting started in their journey, some people are in the middle, some people are looking back. And that stems from my work in the therapy room, where when people come to see me, they're usually in one of those three places. Of course, there's a variation in there. It's not like a specific pinpoint, but within those three categories, I find that that's how I've been able to conceptualize where people are at when they do reach out and connect with me to work on some of their work, their story, and their journey. What part of the journey do you think that you're in? Would you say that you're getting started, in the middle, or are you looking back with respect to your untold story that we are unveiling today?
Yeah, I feel like I'm definitely able now to look back. And on the healing process of that journey, I feel like I'm only getting started in the middle. But that's also the part of me that now arises, is that I feel that I'm able to process it and share the wisdom that has come from it. So I guess it's more the looking back aspect.
Right. I often find that once we've encountered an experience, it is part of us. So it's not like it's going to disappear. I guess it's about how we manage it. And it seems like, we can get triggered, but it's about what we do with the trigger, right? How we integrate, how we process, how we're able to look at it. And it seems like what you're sharing with me is that you have so much more conscious awareness at this point. So even though you might just be getting started with addressing the impacts of mental health that has been placated throughout the years, but you're working through it and you're confident in working through it. And you have tools to access in your back pocket that help you manage and pay attention to what's going on around you. So I find that process very fascinating as well.
Yes, thank you for reminding me that I have tools, because sometimes I feel so alone and I need to call my psychotherapist and every once in a while, but I do, and I need to feel more proud of myself for where I am, because I do feel
now.
that,
Take a moment now to feel proud. There's no time better than right now.
Well, I think sharing my story definitely helps, actually.
Absolutely. And so what do you want to remember about the process of your healing journey?
I want to remember that spark in my heart from my inner child. I want to remember that I was born with this love for everyone, and I just wanted to love. I just wanted everyone to love each other. I wanted this peace and unity, and that's my gift. I really feel that's my soul's purest expression that I have, and then I'm able to be in touch with different areas in my life. I can still be that, but I feel like it wasn't available to me for so long.
Right. And so part of the reminder is to what was not available to you then is available to you now.
Yes, and also that I'm not alone. That
yeah, of course.
Yeah, that we share these stories, and we share those traumas, those similar patterns and whatnot, the addictions, the pain that comes from these stories, and that community is really the support that we all need to heal and grow and feel proud of ourselves and have this beautiful reflection of our highest expression of what we can be, instead of this reactive behaviors from all the pain that we've endured in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Clarity, what would you say that you're grateful for with encountering your journey of your untold story with the abuse, the trauma, the patriarchy?
Salima, I feel that I'm grateful for all of it because, again, I feel that my soul chose it. And in the work that I do now, I empower a lot of people to have this reflection on their shadow. And looking at my shadow, this pain, this trauma, I see it as the biggest gift, actually.
Yeah.
Because every single crack and split and, this closing of the heart and everything actually enabled me to be who I am today, to be able to do the work that I do with those individuals and my groups of women, and to teach from a place of knowing how it feels like to be abused, to be shut down for speaking up, to be belittled. And I am able to have so much compassion for people who have gone through similar stories. And not only that, but is the wounded healer archetype. I was initiated to become exactly who I am today, to be of service in the world. And so I'm grateful for it all. And I don't hold any grudges towards anyone in my family And as I mentioned, there's a lot of love, and I think we're doing really good. Actually, we're all rising together from whatever that past was for us.
Yeah. And it sounds like your untold story, or your story as you've been telling, is the blessing of the work you do. And it has, from what you've just shared, really allowed you to be in service of other people and other women, especially.
Yes, absolutely. This whole healing of my masculine and connecting more with my feminine is definitely what stemmed from this imbalance and feeling this abuse from the masculine and disempowered and these ways. And I'm still on the journey. I'm still learning a lot, but I got so much from being on the journey. Even just holding space for other sisters to share their own story has been tremendously healing for me. And I love it. This is my sole purpose.
Right. That's beautiful. So, Clarity, what would be your key message to the listeners of our show? What do you think it's important for them to know?
I think it's important for them to know that there's always hope, and there's always something we can do. And that can require some strength. It's not a little thing to do something about your condition. That can be very hard in the first place. But even the littlest thing counts, such as feeding yourself a nice, healthy meal, cooking for yourself that day. That could be a big accomplishment.
Sure.
And it all adds up. And one day you wake up and you realize that you are a good person, that you've done your best, and you can go to sleep feeling grateful and in peace with your heart.
What a great message. Anything else you think the listeners should know?
Well, I think another thing that comes to mind is that inherent innocence that we all have, similarly to what I was mentioning about my inner child spark in my heart. And that's a gift. I believe that this is our soul. I believe in the soul, something spiritual in us that is greater, that is beyond all of this human experience, and yet that shows that human experience. To remember that this soul piece of us is there, and we can all connect to it if only we take a moment to feel it in our hearts. That's where it lives for me, is in my heart center, and that is powerful beyond anything else that can be affecting us in our life. So we are way more powerful than we think, and we can all rise, and just really connecting to that innocent soul spark within our hearts.
What a wonderful reminder, especially when you put it at the statement of, we are all way more powerful than we think. So true. The courage, the bravery, it does show up if we open to it.
Yeah, and our consciousness is, I think, the most powerful force in the universe. And so everywhere that we put our attention towards will grow. And just knowing that you can choose to read a book that will inspire you. You can focus on a mandala, or, smell a perfume. There's so many things that you can help you to move beyond those limitations of feeling stuck. This is usually a big pattern. People feel stuck in their patterns and their suffering and their stories. And yet anything can be just this one piece that they need to move forward. A relationship, someone they meet, a teacher, an article, all of these are opportunities to open the door and just walk through and really embrace their full potential and rise from whatever situation they found themselves in.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about what your game changer inspiration would be that closely reflects your untold story. So what I mean by that is there an inspirational quote that comes up for you, a book, or something else that speaks to you?
Absolutely. Woman Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Este changed my life. It's a book that tells different stories, folk stories, myths, that describe this archetypal journey of the soul, and more so of the divine feminine principle within everything, that is closer to woman, because we are embodiment of the divine feminine, and we're conditioned in that feminine way through that feminine form that we have. And so I was able to learn so much through this book, because all the stories are stories that we can all relate to. All those stories describe very deep lessons that we all go through in our lives. And not only the lessons and the challenges and how harsh it can be, because those stories are not children's stories. They're actually not for children and quite intense. And yet how we can also respond and rise from it, or transform more so, because we never just clear a situation or move away. This shadow of ours transforms into being able to help us more in our journey and become an ally for us. If only we can see it, and those stories really help us to develop this awareness of the shadow of those patterns.
Wow. This book, it really seems to have sparked for you something very transformational. Like once you read it, there's no turning back.
Absolutely. That's what I say to everyone. Once you know, you can't unknow, and this book is at a clear download. I actually call it an initiation, because it's quite a masterpiece. And it will work through you on a deep level, through your dreams, through synchronicities, people leaving and coming into your life. It's definitely life-changing, and totally in the most beautiful way.
So interesting. Definitely a book that I'd like to put on my reading list so that I can really experience what you've been describing here.
So that's actually the book that I started doing woman circles around. So every 2 weeks we would meet with my friends at the beginning, when I started doing woman circles, and discuss one chapter of the book. And it took me 9 months to do the full book, and I did that twice. So it was a whole rebirth process that I went through twice. And I just absolutely got a huge download from the book, meaning that I started to understand everything as an archetype, as a symbol relating to the spiritual, because that's what the symbolic reality means. And every story has a lot of these archetypes and symbols. So it helps you to start decoding everything through this language of the soul. And you can start making art with it. You start to be able to interact with those archetypes and symbols, instead of just being a passive player within that story.
I'm so fascinated by any work that does decoding, because I think, it's so, I get compelling, like what's going to show up, right? And what's going to transform, or what's going to be what I don't think it's going to be, just those kind of things always swirl around in my mind.
Yeah. And part of the decoding for me is the deconditioning.
Absolutely. 100%. The deconditioning is for sure an area that many times we have to go back to revisit, because we got the habit going and now we have to unlearn certain habits, right?
Absolutely. But the good news, I find, especially for women, because they're so intuitive, I don't want to generalize. Men can be very intuitive, but women are usually more sensitive and in tune with their bodies and intuition and instinct. So the good news is that they can just go back to what they have always known to be true. And that's the whole journey.
Beautiful. That's just beautiful. Clarity. What is a cause or an organization that's been impactful to you on your journey that maybe you want to give a shout out to?
I wanted to work with organizations, but I never did so because it never actually felt right for me. But what I've done is that I turned my business, Awakened Priestess, into a sort of organization, because my goal through Awakened Priestess is to empower women on their journey to be able to share their gifts with the world, and to really feel fulfilled on their life purpose journey in doing so, because that's so necessary. And women have been, again, conditioned to believe that they can't do that. And so my whole intention with all the courses that I'm offering is for women to really feel that they can show up in these ways and be a leader, be a teacher, be a healer for their community. And the platform Awakened Priestess, now online, hopefully in the future in person again, in retreats, and more so in the physical school. Right now, Awakened Priestess is opening to offer other women's courses, so that I'm not the only teacher, but that other women can use Awakened Priestess as a platform to share their wisdom and share their messages with others.
That's an incredible gift. That's so cool. A great contribution to other women. Well done. That's so special.
It is, and I really love them so much. I really believe in them. I see myself in them, my own journey, how I started, and their usually lack of self-confidence in it. I can relate to it, and when I speak to them, I really speak to them from my heart, and I speak to their soul directly to remind them of what they know to be true, of the fact that they are enough. And that they have such incredible medicine that they actually need to. They have a soul responsibility to share with the world in whatever capacity they are called to. I remind them that they're on the soul mission there, that they're guided every single day by their angels, spirits, ancestors to be able to do this work. And therefore, it's a natural process for them. And I'm just here for them in that capacity.
Wonderful. That's so great. So how can people connect with you? Like, are you findable? Like, if someone wants to, connect with you in some way, just to chat about Awakened Priestess or anything else, with so much inspiration that you have to offer the world, how could someone connect with you?
So my website is a good way to also see the courses I'm offering and find me and contact me. So it's awakenedpriestess.com. And I have a private Facebook page, Clarity Barton. And social media, some people like Instagram. I'm on Instagram as awakened.priestess, and they can just message me in all these different ways.
Wonderful. So we've got Instagram, Facebook, you have a personal page, and your website. That's lovely. Okay. Clarity. You just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Salima. It was a pleasure. It was very good for me to hear myself sharing this story. Thank you for having me.
Oh my goodness. The pleasure is all mine. Clarity, your willingness to do this, to share today, like, lady, this ran real and deep, and it helped me learn many personal aspects of your story and what you've been through, how you've moved through it, the shifts and the twists and turns that have shown up, as well as your journey to resiliency and overcoming all the trauma and the clarity. Your name is Clarity. And the clarity from this journey of what you now want to contribute and give back to others. It's such a beautiful journey that I got to witness as we conversed together today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Samima.
And, I'd like to also thank you for, I feel like I have a couple of thank yous here. I want to thank you for trusting your process that, guided you to be open and, just sharing the details and just all of that. I have so much gratitude. And also just for being part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down barriers of mental stigma. I can't thank you enough.
Well, I'm honored if it can help anyone, even just one person, even just you, Salima. I'm more than happy to have shared this story. And thank you again for inviting me to do that.
Thank you. I'm hopeful that this will help others come forward to tell a story of their own as well. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.